because governments and perpetrator groups really are onto us now. They get, that we do our reports, and they know that we're going to be onto our next report and our next armed conflict, and they know that eventually, we're not going to have the energy to continue pushing and urging them to implement our recommendations. And so they just sort of, they're nice to us. They say, we're going to do an investigation, we're going to sort it out, and then they know that we're going to get distracted and go on to another country. So that's where the local groups come in, and why it's so important that some of the issues that we raise then are taken on by local groups as well as the diaspora. So I want to speak really briefly, and I know there's sort of a lot of ground to cover, about some of the trends I have noticed in human rights and governance. Of course, they're inextricably linked in Africa. And again, there are always exceptions to the rule, but some of the sort of underlying trends. So, I think I'd like to start off. Every continent in every country is fraught with examples of atrocious behavior by individuals and then collectively, be it by armed groups, by non-state actors, by communities. And what protects us from both individually and collectively organized abuse are frameworks of protection. And in Africa, of course, those frameworks were through tribes, through communities, sometimes through religious organizations that actually protected people. And they also had their problems. Of course, we all know there have been histories of slavery and lots of sort of organized abuse from one group to the other, from one ethnic group to the other. But generally speaking, it is that protection framework that existed. Obviously, then through colonial times, some of those structures began to be broken down by design in order to the benefit of the colonial powers. And so, at present, you have sort of the traditional forms of protection, that eventually went wrong. And now it is the institutions that should represent and protect ordinary people in Africa from abuse, both individual and collective abuse. And my observations in the various different countries that I have worked and that I have traveled is that it is those same institutions that are designed to protect and represent the people of Africa that are extremely weak. We're talking about the rule of law institutions. And here, we're talking about the police. Often the importance of the police, which forms the bedrock of a judicial case, is a police investigation. It is the first port of call that people go to when there is some sort of an abuse, be it criminal or be it other kinds of abuses. So policing is extremely weak in Africa. And obviously the army, which is there to defend the national interest. In so many places, it is these institutions which are designed to protect the people turn out to be the worst perpetrators. It is the worst perpetrators of abuses against individuals and groups. We see it again and again and again. We have done lots of work on torture. The policing is either politicized, where you have policing serving instead of being a Republican institution, they're serving the interests of the ruling party. We have done lots of work in Nigeria, for example, in other countries on corruption and how policing is turned into an enterprise, and where they're even trickle down. We did a report on Nigeria looking at sort of the trickle down theory of or trickle up rather theory of the individual police officers who would get money, and then eventually they had to pay off to their superior officers. So, this is a key rule of law institution, is the police. Then we have the judiciaries. And I don't have to tell any of you, or probably many of you, come from countries where, we're talking 75, 80, in some countries 90% of the detainees are there in extended pretrial detention. I mean, in some of the countries and some of the prisons we've been into, people are there for stealing a mango or for stealing, something and then the cases are lost and they just rot in jail. There was one prisoner in one country I worked in West Africa where they had a prisoner who had stolen, or a young man who had stolen, I don't know if it was a chicken or a bicycle or something. It's of course one has to be investigated and held accountable, but he was there so long they called him Mandela, because he must have been there for 15 years, because they lost his case. So those kinds of abuses, again, this is a state-sponsored abuse by the judiciary, which is they're supposed to be adjudicating and mitigating some of the abuses. Then, of course, corrections.